Nothing's ever perfect, but if you're open to the side, magic in the moment, life it's only mine. I'll never stop loving and treating people kind. One day the world will set me free, and I'll be dancing across the sky.
I think one of our problems is most people here know what's going on, but the mainstream is not telling the truth. We know that. It's a lie. Fauci's he lies. Prof. Chastudowski said doesn't want to personalize it, so he says he's lying to himself. But in an interview, he said, yeah, he's lying. I mean, we got to identify these people. So let's go with the first very important point is that the PCR tests they are not fit for purpose. Okay, and I think everyone here knows that. They're not meant to be used as a diagnostic tool. But I mean, the mainstream doesn't want to seem to reinforce that major point that the data is fake. Okay, okay. So I'm gonna talk briefly about that and one short paragraph about that, and the other thing that is also probably a lot of people here know is that prior to this pandemic, the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, changed the coding for deaths. Okay, so there's two parts to a death certificate. And the first part is supposed to be the cause of death, maybe cancer, maybe heart disease, things of that nature. They changed it so that COVID would be at the first part. Doctors were instructed to put presumed COVID in the first part of the death certificate and to negate the real causes of death and put those in the second part, which is a fraud. It's a crime. This whole thing is a crime. So let me just read you a paper I wrote for Global Research. We know that the PCR tests being used are not fit for purpose, that they are for research use only. They are not meant to be used as diagnostic tools. And the late inventor of the RT-PCR instruments was very clear about this. According to the late Dr. Kary Mullis, who, by the way, had a very low opinion of Fauci, PCR detects a very small segment of the nucleic acid, which is part of a virus itself. The specific fragment detected is determined by the somewhat arbitrary choice of DNA primers used, which become the ends of the amplified fragment. Okay? So there's a purpose for these PCR instruments, but the purpose does not include diagnosis. Okay? That is huge. Because the papers are picking up on these so-called PCR tests and saying how many cases. It's all fraud. Okay, now let's go to the death certificates. This is also huge. We also know that coding changes to death certificates have fabricated false perceptions of COVID lethality. CDC coding changes blurred the important distinction between dying of COVID and dying with COVID. Consequently, comorbidities such as heart disease, cancer, etc., have been largely negated, and COVID has been relegated an artificially high importance in terms of cause of death reporting. Dr. and I apologize, I can't get this name right, Ngozi Ezeki explained the death count in a May 2020 press conference with these words. This is what she said. So, the case definition is very simplistic. It means, at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. That means nothing, by the way. She knows that. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then, so you're in hospice, given a few weeks to live, and then you were also to have found to have COVID, that would have counted as a COVID death. It means that if technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. I hope that's helpful. That's what she said. Now, according to an article, and you can see this on Global Research, it's by H. Ely, M. McAvoy, etc. This is what they write, and it's a peer-reviewed article, and it has an abstract. You can read that too. The 2003 guidelines for establishing death certificates had been canceled. Had the CDC used its industry standard medical examiner's and coroner's handbook on death registration and fetal death reporting revision 2003, as it has for all other causes of death for the last 17 years, the COVID fatality count would be approximately, get this, 90.2% lower than it currently is. To summarize then, the tests that are widely used to test for COVID are not fit for diagnostic purposes. Additionally, prior to the announced pandemic, coding changes were made to death certificates that have resulted in false and very significantly increased death certificates. And if you want to see the proof of all the articles that I just quoted, I have it right here. Okay? So, these are huge crimes. And it's global. And this is why we call it crimes against humanity. People are losing their jobs, their livelihoods, their lives. Thank you.
Right here is pictures of people in hospitals dancing. Nurses, doctors, dancing. So the top picture here is a bunch of hospital staff with a dead body in a white body bag with COVID-19 written at the feet. If that was a real live dead body, that would be an indignity to a dead body. That would be Criminal Code Section 182 of the Criminal Code. So we know that it's a hoax. So as you know, I constantly talk about the Lieutenant Governor. It's the Lieutenant Governor that can revoke orders, that has made orders, and can extend orders. So it's the Lieutenant Governor that's responsible for all of this. And I'm going to read the order of March 17th, 2020 that made the order. And whereas the criteria set out in subsection 7.0.1 bracket 3 of the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act has been satisfied. And I'll read you that part paraphrased. The resources normally available cannot be relied upon without the risk of serious delay. The resources may be insufficiently effective to address the emergency, and it's not possible without the risk of serious delay to ascertain whether those resources can be relied upon. Never have they disclosed what those resources were. So the report on the 129-day declaration of emergency never discusses the criteria, nor the circumstances, nor the resources that cannot be relied upon in section 7.0.1 bracket 3 for making the declaration of emergency, nor was it ever divulged or sworn under oath to the population ever still to this day. that makes this a hoax. So I accuse the Lieutenant Governor, Elizabeth Doddswell, and Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, of the following criminal code violations. Criminal Code Section 83.01, bracket 1, bracket B, domestic terrorism, and Criminal Code Section 83.231, bracket 1, hoax regarding terrorism. The Lieutenant Governor, Elizabeth Doddswell, and Premier Doug Ford did cause public intimidation with regards to its security, including economic security, causing persons to do or refrain from doing any act, such as freedom of assembly, freedom of the right to the gaining of a livelihood, freedom not to breathe in one's own carbon dioxide, among many other things. The Lieutenant Governor, Elizabeth Doddswell, and Premier Doug Ford recklessly endangered the lives of children, the elderly, the vulnerable, and the healthy segment of the population. The Lieutenant Governor, Elizabeth Doddswell, and Premier Doug Ford also caused serious disruption and interference of essential services. One example of a very significant essential service that was seriously disrupted and interfered with is access to the justice of the peace by any member of the population. The JP office, the Justice of the Peace office, has not been processing private prosecution applications from the population to this day since March 2020. The population does not have access to the Justice of the Peace. The Lieutenant Governor, Elizabeth Doddswell, and Premier Doug Ford did commit Criminal Code Sections 83.01, bracket 1, bracket B, domestic terrorism, and Section 83.231, bracket 1, hoax regarding terrorism. And I call upon the police to lawfully take them into custody immediately and charge them with those criminal code offenses. And because there is a death involved, like suicides, that would be life in prison.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. So we're going to be here again. That's Wednesday at noon. We're just going to hand out some flyers, raise out some awareness. This is totally optional. For those who don't feel comfortable giving Fraser cash, we do have a GoFundMe. It's Hamilton Hugs Over Masks. We're using this funding to help people who have received these fines a few weeks back, such as Jason and Fraser, but I guess Fraser has his own legal team. But yeah, anyway, guys, we're going to be here on Wednesday once again. Bring your signs out. We'll hand out the flyers. Thanks for coming out, guys.
Yeah.